Now I'd like to introduce a very close friend of the University of Iowa, Major General Stuart Wallace, and he will have some remarks and then introduce our first speakers. So General Wallace, over to you.
Thank you, Travis. It's a pleasure to be here again this year and participate in the conference. As the military advisor for the Technology Institute for the last 3 years, I've been able to work with some great people as we have advanced the technology in human modeling and simulation. In that regard, looking forward in the future, we have established an advisory committee consisting of 9 individuals from academia, the military, as well as the civilian world. And I'm pleased to be the chairman of that advisory council. And we will work with the folks here at the Institute to advance more opportunities beyond what we are currently working. In addition, we have established a pilot program where we are focusing more of our resources on the Department of Defense, and we'll continue to work that for the next 2 or 3 years with a special effort. Enough from me now. I'd like to turn it over to Colonel Kevin Bigelman and Dr. Chip East from the Center for Initial Military Training, who we've been working with for the last couple of years. So, Colonel Bigelman, thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I think your comments and those comments from Senator Ernst today are a perfect segue as we transition into our discussions. But before we begin, I think we'd like to thank you, General Wallace, and Dr. Malek, and all the great colleagues here at the Iowa Technology Institute for organizing today's symposium. I'm Kevin Bigelman, and along with my colleague and friend, Dr. Whitfield East, will provide you with a brief update on the Army's Holistic Health and Fitness System and the Army Combat Fitness Test. And in the Army, we use a lot of acronyms, so we'll take Holistic Health and Fitness and we'll shorten it down to H2F, and the Army Combat Fitness Test is the ACFT. So if you can go to the second slide, please. So we always start with the question, why do we need H2F in the Army? We know that soldiers are our most critical weapon system, yet we're significantly challenged by a variety of factors that impact individual soldier personal readiness. And so if you look at the numbers, our recruiting pool of those qualified for military service is getting smaller year to year, influenced by a variety of factors, one of which is obesity. We're challenged by overweight and obesity in the active, guard, and reserve components as well. We also know that musculoskeletal injuries impact over 55% of soldiers every year, and we spend a heck of a lot of money, nearly $577 million on patient care for those MSKIs. We've got soldiers with sleep disorders requiring sleep prescription aids, and we know that just one night of sleep loss is associated with an increase in risk of physical injury by 54%, and a decrease in the hormone levels that are involved in muscle recovery and repair by 90%. And so for just a small reduction in these behaviors translates into huge savings for the Army, but more importantly, it improves the health of our force. And so the H2F system, as we've designed it, really is to focus on those 5 main goals. We're trying to increase individual soldier personal readiness. We want to optimize physical, non-physical performance. We want to reduce and drive down musculoskeletal injury rates. We recognize that soldiering is a contact sport and soldiers will be injured. When they get injured, we want to return them rapidly to the battlefield. And then ultimate goal is to improve the readiness of our force. Next slide, please. So really the backbone of H2F system is the use of interdisciplinary teams consisting of physical therapists, occupational therapists, registered dietitians, strength and conditioning coaches, athletic trainers, and cognitive performance specialists surrounding the soldiers in close proximity to where they live and work. But the use of these interdisciplinary teams is not a new concept. If you look at all major sports, if you look at professional leagues, if you look at collegiate leagues or collegiate programs, if you look at our national teams, they all surround their athletes with SMEs, subject matter experts, that are designed to optimize and improve the performance of their individual athletes, or in our case, soldiers. So as we created the H2F system, the Army partnered with some of these organizations to better understand how to most effectively care for our athletes or our soldiers. Next, please. About a year ago, the Army changed its physical training doctrine. Field Manual, or FM 7-22, was formerly known as Army Physical Readiness Training. And in the past, we only focused on the physical aspect of training with a one-size-fits-all approach, and that's not working. So now we've rewritten our manual. FM 722 is now Holistic Health and Fitness. And we take a more holistic approach with dedicated chapters on important non-physical domains like sleep readiness and spiritual and mental and nutritional readiness. And so there's also 2 associated Army techniques publications with this FM. The first includes all Army testing, so the Occupational Physical Assessment Test, the Army Combat Fitness Test, the Combat Water Survival Test, and the second ATP describes over 600 plus drills and exercises associated with the new H2F system. And then that document on the right is our strategic operating concept. And all these documents are open source and can easily be downloaded. If you'd like to get a copy, we can certainly make that happen for you. Next slide, please. When we think of H2F, we describe it as the physical domain and then 4 non-physical domains. And the physical domain is easy for most to understand. It's the strength, power, coordination, agility, balance, anaerobic capacity that soldiers need to have success in combat on the battlefield. But the other non-physical domains are a little bit more challenging, I think, for some folks to understand, particularly the mental readiness piece. It's less well understood, but it's certainly impacted by a variety of factors, including a person's character, their behavior, their resilience, their cognitive skill, their social acuity. We get into the spiritual readiness domain, not necessarily talking about religion, but really it's the beliefs, principles, and values that get a soldier through times of stress, hardship, or tragedy. Nutritional readiness, we want to have soldiers make the right choices. They're able to recognize, select, and then consume the right beverages and food that will meet the demands of both physical and non-physical environments that we deploy to. And then in terms of sleep readiness, I think it's the most critical requirement or domain that we talk about in H2F. Obviously, sleep is required for brain health and function, but it also impacts everything we do in our life. So our physical performance, our non-physical performance, how we think, how we feel, how we respond in our relationships to others. Sleep is absolutely critical, and I believe it's something that we haven't paid much attention to in the Army, but that's changed with this new doctrine. Next, please. It's just a wire diagram of what these H2F performance teams look like. It's a mix of military, officers and NCOs, Department of the Army civilians, and contractors. And these SMEs are working in an interdisciplinary fashion to support the health and fitness of our soldiers. They come with deployable training or deployable medical equipment sets. When we go downrange, the providers are able to take the right equipment that they need to care for soldiers. There's also garrison home station equipment. And we'll talk about the Soldier Performance Readiness Center here in just a minute. But it's these interdisciplinary teams that will improve the health and fitness of our soldiers moving into the future. Next, please. This is just my last slide. Along with the experts, the subject matter experts that are required for the H2F system, we also believe a facility structure called the Soldier Performance Readiness Center will be necessary for each of these H2F resource brigades. It's about 40,000 square feet of facility entirely dedicated to both the physical and non-physical demands that a soldier will go through daily, staffed by the H2F performance teams that we previously talked about. And then units will rotate into the SPARC throughout the day, 1 or 2 times per week, to get the right education, training, coaching that is necessary for success. So that's H2F 101 very quickly. Happy to answer any questions that you might have, but I'll turn it over to my colleague, Dr. East, for the Army Combat Fitness Test.
Thanks, Colonel Bigelman. If we'll go to the next slide, please. And you can advance one more, please. And one more. Thank you. So approximately 11 years ago, believe it or not, we had a directive from Lieutenant General Hertling, who was the commander of the Center for Initial Military Training, to change the Army's PT test. It was a result of 10 years of war. And if you remember back to that period from 2008 to 2010, there were some significant stressors on the United States Army relative to multiple deployments and combat overseas. And the general consensus of Army senior leaders was that the 3-event APFT was not sufficient to, A, ensure soldiers were capable of executing common soldier tasks, but also to drive training. We, to a certain degree, have a group or a number of soldiers who are focused on standards, and we were telling soldiers that if you could do some push-ups and sit-ups and run 2 miles, you were good to go relative to functioning in a high kinetic environment. So in 2013, Army senior leaders put forth a HQDA XORD 04113 called the Baseline Soldier Physical Readiness Requirement Study. And we've spent the last 8 years, more or less, developing the Army Combat Fitness Test. And I want to give you just a couple of minutes of background on that to kind of orient you to where we are today. It was really a classic concurrent validation study, very simplistic in design, come up with a criterion measure, come up with predictor measures, go out and collect a whole lot of field-placed data, and then basically execute some modeling and regression analysis to come up with an assessment. Before I go to the next slide, I just want to emphasize that predictive validity was not the single focus of the Army Combat Fitness Test development. It was also important that the test drive comprehensive training across all domains of fitness, but also to help us drive down injuries and associated attrition. So next slide, please. After we distilled the common soldier task, we broke down the constituent parts of those tasks and identified 5 domains of performance that were associated with those common soldier tasks. It's not going to be surprising to you that it was muscular strength, muscular endurance, anaerobic or explosive power, aerobic endurance, and high intensity speed and agility or mobility. So these were the 5 components of the tasks, and we worked to align the exercises that would ultimately be used in the test to those 5 constructs, if you will. Next slide, please. So, but I thought it was important for you to at least understand what the criterion measure was. And this was probably the most difficult part of the study, because anytime we looked at common soldier tasks, the metrics on there were not always as specific as we wanted them to be. And so we spent over a year coming up with what we called the Warrior Task and Battle Drill Simulation Test. And I just wanted to show you a few photos of the components. So the first component was to move to contact, to simulate kind of a mission set. And then the second was build a hasty fighting position. Now, in most cases, you would move to contact and take direct or indirect fire and build a hasty fighting position. But unfortunately, from a science standpoint, the hasty fighting position was such a rate limiter in soldier performance that we had to move it to the front, because once soldiers started this simulation test, they had to move through every one of the events. So we actually moved hasty fighting position up. The third was move over, under, and around obstacles in an uneven terrain. And you can see a variety of walls and platforms and low movements and windows, obviously very unsophisticated relative to the equipment, but very effective in terms of performance. Next slide, please. The fourth then was employ progressive levels of force, which gets back to that force generation construct. Tire flips, sled pushes. We had, in particular, I thought the trash can rotation was really interesting. We went to the combative school and spent a week down there, and they helped us develop these exercises. And the last was casualty extraction and evacuation. So that is a summary of what every soldier who participated in the study executed. before they did the common field exercises. Next, please. So we basically put virtually, it became a Chinese menu of all of the options for exercises. We had deadlift and dips and sit-ups and trunk rotations and almost every exercise. We had 23 different exercises. So I thought it was important for you to see the progression. We actually did multiple regressions against the Warrior Task and Bow Drill for the 8 PFT scores out of Riley and Benning. And what we found across the spectrum of samples, it was about a 40% predictor of a soldier's ability to execute the Warrior Task and Bow Drill simulation test. We actually created a test based on the exercises we used at Fort Riley to create the 2010 failed attempt at an Army PRT test. It was about 56% predictive. When we ran the Riley sample, it was about 73% predictive. And your first question might be, well, it should have been more predictive. But you have to understand, when we were at Riley testing, individual participants were taking events on different days. So I may do push-ups on Monday and sled push on Wednesday. So that was where we saw the drop off in the R squareds. And so when we went to Fort Benning, we actually ran the entire 8-item test that you see down below. At the end of that period of time, senior leaders were too much equipment, too much time, too many events. And we were instructed to come up with a combination of sprint, drag, carry that involved the sled push, sled drag, and the 300-meter shuttle run, which really we think worked out pretty well in terms of reducing equipment or reducing time to execute tasks. So basically, we're at about 80% in terms of the R squared values for prediction, which of course is well above the kind of industry standard of about 70%. Next slide, please. So I just thought I would, finish with this slide. There's a lot of discussion about men and women. There's a lot of discussion about physiological differences. Clearly, there are physiological differences that we need to account for. We believe that from an Army perspective that we can account for those through policy. So we've come up with the Army Combat Fitness Test 3.0, which we believe accounts for those physiological differences. But I wanted to list a slide here. I ran some residuals off the 6 events and then did some regression slopes, some lines there for, I think one of the things that's important to notice is that those lines are parallel, which means, as women perform better and better on the Army Combat Fitness Test, which they are starting to do, their Warrior Task and Bow Drill simulation times are going to continue to go down too. And what we'll see is, in this natural regression towards the mean, we'll see those two lines come closer and closer together as individuals continue to train for the test, which we believe, and there's already some both empirical and anecdotal evidence, that we're going to reduce injuries and reduce associated attrition. Next, please. That would be all for me. Thank you very much. And I appreciate University of Iowa Technology Institute in hosting this and having us here today, and for the incredible work they've done with the Center for Initial Military Training over the last 2 years. Thanks, Travis.
Thank you. One quick immediate question came up with and I know we have a video coming up and we have Kareem coming up, but the difference of designing a holistic health and fitness program, a fitness test event, using modeling and simulation now versus 30, 40 years ago, when you really didn't have the technology to model the human body as well. And so it's kind of a question of how much more are we learning now compared to then by having virtual human models and having modeling and simulation that we can compare it against.
So I think of it, there's 2 aspects to it. Anyone who's done field research understands the vagaries of field research. You get out at 5 o'clock in the morning and you're missing something, or the lights don't come on, or soldiers don't show up. It's problematic. We consented many more subjects than we actually assessed in the study, which were still large numbers of subjects. But where I'm headed with this is what we can do now, or what you can do, what University of Iowa can do virtually, is they can teach Santos and Sophia to perform these activities virtually, and then we can iterate that as much as we want. We can change body size, height, weight, load, and then we can also change, the one that's most appealing to me is the ruck or the approach march. So I can do it over, improved terrain, unimproved terrain. I can set the slope of the terrain. I can set the obstacles in the terrain, and I can run those iterations virtually in a matter of days, weeks, and months that would take years and years, I think, for the Army to do and assess accurately. So I think by virtue of the fact that you have both the biomechanics and the physics model behind it, as well as the metabolics, it's quite remarkable what they're able to do.
And Travis, I think adding state of hydration, nutrition, sleep quality, quantity, latency, all those indicators, certainly we'd rather learn virtually rather than put soldiers through multiple rounds of testing. So I think the sky's the limit.
Okay, yeah, that's a good segue to the next question. Was what's the future, like the next 2, 3, 4 years of implementation look like, and current plan, and then are there some potential gaps or areas that you're looking for technology or others to help with? So kind of what the future looks like.
So I think the future is this: over the next couple of years, really we spent a lot of time getting the right people on board, hired, and down into the brigades. And that process is ongoing as we speak. By the end of October, or the beginning of October, we should have 28 H2F performance teams established on 5 installations across the Army. So if you go to Fort Bragg, Fort Bliss, Fort Drum, Fort Polk, or Joint Base Lewis McChord up in Washington, you'll see these teams in action right now. And they're already changing the culture of health and fitness. We can share videos and so have some really great photos of what's currently happening down at the units. Soldiers actually deadlifting and going through nutritional training and courses to better understand how they eat impacts how they perform, and more emphasis on sleep. But these things are changing the culture. Over the next year, we're gonna maintain those 28 brigades, and then we're going to grow at a rate of 10 brigades per year of H2F resource teams out to fiscal year 2030. So at the end of this, we'll have 110 brigades across the Army sourced with H2F performance teams. In terms of, so that's the first piece, getting personnel there. Equipment takes time to procure and get down to the unit, so that's the next big phase of this. And then I mentioned the Soldier Performance Readiness Center, these actual facilities, these structures. We've got funding available beginning in fiscal year 23, so a couple of years from now, you'll start to see, we're going to try to renovate existing facilities, but where we can't renovate, we're going to build new SPARC, Soldier Performance Readiness Centers. In terms of technology and kind of where we think about that, I think there's a lot of talk about how we track our return on investment for H2F, and I think an athlete management system, our soldier management system that kind of tracks along the 5 domains that we mentioned, the physical and the 4 non-physical, is where the Army will get to. I think wearables certainly has a place in the Army in the long term, and wearables that can populate an athlete management systems, something that's easy, convenient, doesn't take a lot of time for soldiers to upload or download their information. I think kind of that's the way of the future down the road a few years.
So I think, and I probably have to come back and do the math on this, but I think on any given day we have more soldiers geographically dispersed than centralized. We tend to think of even the active component, which is only 40-some%, 40, even if it's 50%. We have a large proportion of the active component that's not in a garrison environment. They're all somewhere doing other things. And so when you roll back in the Guard and Reserve, we have a lot of individuals who are geographically dispersed. So I think that's for me, initially kind of this prime opportunity for the wearable, the model that allows these individuals, to be synced into the H2F process from a distance, but also to relate information, to demonstrate that they're tracking in terms of the H2F system. So I think that's really critical relative to what we have available here.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time. I know there will be more questions that will be coming in. To go into more detail on the relationship between the Iowa Technology Institute and our two most famous individuals, Santos and Sophia, and their relationship with the ACFT, we're going to play a short video. This video also serves as kind of a break transition from what was kind of the first hour of a live event in the room in person, and then the remaining presentations will be conducted virtually. So this video will play, and I always think about what if we had Santos back when they said, hey, do the sit-up this way, and what if we could have modeled that and figured out, oh, if you do that for 10 years, your lower back's going to suffer. So those are the insights that we see coming up. So if you can, cue up the video. That'll give everybody a short break, and then when we come back, I'll turn it over to Dr. Kareem Malik.